Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Acquire and Operate. We are buying and building a portfolio of niche, vertical, B2B SaaS businesses, often referred to as Micro SaaS. We're doing it in public. We're trying to do it our own way. We're having a hell of a lot of fun along the way. A lot of learning opportunities, a lot of staying in the steep part of the learning curve. Insert whatever cliche about, hard work that's worth doing.
Yeah.
And we're doing it in public because hopefully we're inspiring others to do it. And hopefully, this resonates. It's kind of an interesting path. And so far it's been productive for us.
And we feel like we're getting a lead at it.
Yeah, we're trying. At least, we're trying to break ground, progress the sport as it were. Topic du jour. Ooh, that sounds nice. I'll have that.
Yeah, let's keep that going. We've done it the last 3 episodes. Let's keep that going. Topic du jour
is moving from indecision. So a little bit of a riff today. So we're going to talk about, this could have been amusing, honestly, which has been a hot minute since we did one of those. But it's an operating concept. It's an acquisition concept. It's kind of universally applicable. And the headline is moving from indecision and overthinking to clarity and action with this framework. Big promise. And table of contents wise, we're going to jump into, so the framework, spoiler alert, is mapping the universe of outcomes, or mapping a spectrum of outcomes, which is in itself kind of a mental model, or it pulls from a lot of different mental models. You can put it on the shelf as its own thing, but it kind of slaps with a lot of other stuff. And so we'll talk about when and why mapping the universe of outcomes is useful. And then we spun up an SOP, I always hate saying SOP, a standard operating procedure. But it is a playbook, an action thing, so you can utilize this. And so the headline here is, there are few situations, or not the headline, I guess the lead in is, there are very few mental, emotional states that I just despise more than what I call a spin cycle, which is you're just turning things over in your head. Oh God, what is happening? There's fear everywhere,
self-analysis,
uncertainty everywhere. And you're like, there's no progress being made. You're just sprinting on a treadmill. You end up exhausted. You end up fatigued. It kills mental health. It's just the worst place to be ever. And so if you find yourself spin cycling, this is a framework that I go to every time. And it depends a little bit on context. And we talk about the usual suspect kind of context here. But typical ones are like negotiating, buying and selling a business, super high stakes. You're going into any kind of meeting that's high stakes. You're planning a big strategic investment in product versus a hiring decision versus an acquisition expense. Whatever the case may be, the hope here is that you can structure your thinking and kind of establish kind of tangible outcomes that you can plan for, that you are able to kind of understand the most critical drivers in play. And I guess that's kind of a derivative of structured thinking. And ultimately, you kind of emerge with an action-oriented plan, or at least kind of a clear point of view on, this is the grand slam outcome. This is the absolute worst outcome. These are likely outcomes. And then here are some wild card outcomes. And then starting to think through it that way. Without further ado, Kev, anything to add there, my friend? How much do you love spin cycling?
Dude, just so amazing. I love it when people are just spitballing ideas all around. We hit the paralysis of analysis, and then it's like, there's no priorities or action items. I just love that. But yeah, no, I was going to say earlier that this reminds me of like reading The Art of Start, right? Art of the Start. It just basically just gives you the framework of how to take all of your ideas, map out everything that's in front of you that might be holding you back, and just how to take that initial first step. So I love that we're going through this exercise, and I think it's useful for it. It's really just creating like ninjas, giving you frameworks to create a ninja on how to.
Oh, and like there's a lot of kind of inspiration here. So in terms of like scaling venture principles, our stuff is all riddled in here. So action removes doubt, focus creates the space for performance. And Hormozy has a good one where he like operationalizes emotions. And I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but he's like, anxiety is a ton of options without a sense of priority. Feeling trapped is not having options. And so when you find yourself feeling anxious, it's like your first job is to create a sense of priority, like understand what is the biggest point of operating leverage or the big impact thing you can focus on. When you find yourself feeling hopeless, create an option. Like cultivate options forward, no matter how small they are. But the main thing is, and Brad Pitt said this one time, and I can't remember what he was on like some weird interview, but he's like, you got to stay like the great white shark, stay moving, don't stop moving. Like, just stay moving. And I was like, damn, Brad, You handsome and wise. You handsome and wise, Brad. All right. So, and I'll screen share and just kind of pull some of this stuff up. Let's do it. All right. So the objective, and I'm going to read a little bit. Sorry, that's never fun. But so SOP has kind of a generalized structure. There's an overview, the core, and then into the core procedure, and very straightforward. So overview, like what's the objective? The objective is to help decision makers anticipate risks and opportunities by mapping best, worst, and likely case outcomes across various scenarios, allowing for informed decisions in high leverage or high stakes situations. Could all use that. An example scope, as we had spoken about, kind of acquisition negotiations, buy, sell, meeting prep, strategic planning, product development, risk mitigation. There's so many flavors of this. And honestly, it's good to kind of treat this as like default. We've talked about the RICE model as a good way to kind of compare, I guess, alternative options or kind of investments, and kind of thinking that, okay, we have capital and we need to allocate it. And there's kind of finite capital and a wide range of places we can put it. RICE is great to kind of objectively determine, all right, what's going to give us most bang for our buck. This one is pretty good when you're just kind of feeling like wandering. I'm trying to think if there's others. Obviously, you have just like a straight up pros, cons. And something funny there, it's like, it's always funny where you have like this, I go left or I go right, and you'll do the pros and cons of each. And it's like, actually, I just need to do the pros and cons of one decision. And then I kind of understand both sides of the coin. And it's simple.
Yep.
Like, are there more pros than cons? Go, baby, go.
And then there's the Pareto principle, you know?
Exactly. And we've introduced some of that thinking here where it's like, just like with all our SOPs, it's like, cool, this is great. Now apply Pareto principle, power law, however you want to think about it, and strip out all the noise. All right. So the core procedure is like the first thing, and this is interesting, but identifying key variables. A lot of times I jump right to the scenarios, and I think that's okay. But it's like, and then this kind of something that me and you have been talking about so much, Kev, where and God, my phone's listening, but last time I was up in my feed, it was like, worrying is like worshiping the problem.
Yeah.
God damn, how pure is that? Oh, that is pure as rain.
I think I had posted that on my Instagram too.
Oh my God. Like worshiping or worrying is like worshiping the problem. So I think
Yes,
always start with the best case outcome. And then it's kind of your job anytime you, after this exercise, feel yourself being yanked towards fear embedded. God, what if this happens? What if this happens? Projecting far into the future. It's like a mantra. And so you just kind of revert, because there's going to be a loop in your mind, probably in some way, some form. So take control over that and let like your mind's tendency to loop work for you. And so go back to the best case outcome and just visualize your brains out. Mantras are super helpful too. Because instead of being like, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? It's like, this will happen. This will happen. This will happen. And you just manifest. And we're going to get a little meta on today's episode.
See, and as you're saying all of that, that's why my brain usually jumps to step 2 first, similarly to you. I try to think about the outcome I want, and I'm like, okay, what are all the various variables involved that can avoid me getting there, roadblock me to get in there? So for me, it's like step 2 usually comes first most times, but I can see both kind of happening simultaneously, right?
Well, and a problem well defined is half solved is a good one. I think that's a Buddhist mantra. That's some ninja shit there. So, and I guess let's just talk about variables. So I think the main thing is like, and back to some of the stuff that obviously there starts to be some patterns in what we're chatting about, and back to Dalio, and like the person who has the best grasp on the physics around them or the reality around them tends to realize the best outcomes or predict things the best. And so first thing is kind of like, and the context depends, or is very critical, obviously, but if there are quantifiable metrics in place, so if you're thinking about like a hardcore business decision, it's like, all right, what do we have? What kind of internal metrics can we consider? Well, revenue, churn, CAC, LT, whatever. Okay, what about external factors that we have less control over? So kind of mapping the territory that way is very productive. And then just thinking about like, what are the forces in play? What is the stuff that's happening? Incentives is a very good way to think about it too. Like what are each respective party's incentives? Okay, cool. Especially in a negotiation. So anyway, just list out the key variables or assumptions if that's available to you and that's relevant. And then from there, you get to kind of the meat of this, which is defining a best possible scenario, defining an absolute god-awful worst scenario, sprinkling in some likely scenarios. And then this was great too, is like wildcard events. Because I think that's like a good thought experiment. It's like, what's the really weird shit that could come out of nowhere? And it's like, oh my God, that. I didn't even think of that. And it's like, yeah, exactly. That's why we're doing this exercise. And then ideally you have kind of a scenario map. So you've got kind of scenario or spectrum of you've got outcome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Yeah.
and they're all kind of tagged. I do them in descending order at the beginning. So I'm like best, likely, worst, wild card. And then from there, you want to quantify the outcome. So this is where you start to get into like probabilistic thinking, where you take those kind of scenarios, and if it's just like a kind of subjective, like a meeting or whatever, just apply a probability and shoot from the hip. If there are scenarios that are kind of quantifiable, then you want to think about what are the metrics that kind of foot to this, the lagging indicators, revenue, cost, probability, if it's like a hardcore business setting. But ultimately you want to just assign probabilities and think about like what are the metrics that kind of foot to these different outcomes. And I kind of got ahead of us. And after that, you would assign probabilities, but assuming that it's like a big meeting and it's like, well, it could go this way and it could go that way. And it's not like, well, revenue is going to go up or revenue is going to go down. You just jump to probabilities and it's like 50% chance this happens, 10% this terrible outcome happens, and the rest is evenly distributed amongst like most likely. But if you can quantify the outcomes, you want to do that because that becomes very important when you start to think about operating leverage and highest probability, highest kind of quantifiable outcome that's good and you're certain kind of it to your benefit, and away you go. And then I guess on the quantify outcomes piece, one thing too is sensitivity analysis is very useful. So it's basically like, what happens if we're 10% more right than we think we could be? What happens if we're 10% wrong, especially when you're thinking about forecasts and financial modeling? Sensitivity analysis is great. It helps you understand. It's like, damn, if we miss this thing by 10%, it doesn't touch revenue. If we miss this other thing by 10%, revenue falls off a cliff. It's like, oh shit, we better focus on that thing.
That makes total sense. Kind of like thinking in standard deviations.
Or distributions, right? And ideally, the thing is normally distributed. So you're like, cool, this is the mean. This is the middle of the bell curve. This is one standard deviation out. Anything beyond that, let's not really think too much about.
Right.
Cool. And then you get into actually evaluating and assigning probabilities. So this is where you're going into a meeting. It's like, could go this way, could go that way. You're probably just using your gut. If you're going into something that has data available to you, you're like, obviously, show me the data. Show me the data. Opinions are great. Show me the data. Historical data is it great? And ideally, you have access to some of that. Historical performance is the best predictor of future performance, while also acknowledging there's no way to predict future performance. We're all tricking ourselves if we think we can. But you want to use, like the headline here is assessing the likelihood of the scenario, right? So period. So back to, we have our outcomes mapped. We've identified some variables that are kind of associated to those outcomes, some quantifiable variables. Now we're going into assigning probabilities. So you want to utilize historical data. So that's kind of back to this concept of internal versus external. Historical data is your best friend, especially in kind of an operating capacity. And then you want to lean out to expert input. So ideally, are there people that participate in the market? Are there industry analysts? Are there blah, 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 blah? Is there anybody else in the world who might have a better handle on this thing that I could get some input from, just to stress test or help you kind of get to a point of departure or a point of view as it relates to probabilities? And so at this point,
I would say there are a ton of sites out there where they do market trend reports annually. So I mean, that's another great resource as well. And then there are companies who hire these analysts and they'll send them out to go answer any question you're looking to research. So yeah,
totally.
You definitely want to get a few expert inputs in there.
And so you should emerge from this with like a probability weighted thing. So it's 100%. Like, here's the likelihood of this thing, and here's the financial metric that's associated, or some type of quantifiable metric that's associated to it. Okay, and then you can start to understand magnitude, degree of risk, margin of risk, stuff like that. And then ultimately you're at a place now where you can make some calls or at least get out of your head. And it's like, okay, here's the thing. This meeting can go 5 ways. This is the way I want it to go. I think there's a 50% shot. This is the way that would go. That would be catastrophic. I think there's a 15% shot. This isn't going to add up to 100, but the other 3 likely, there's one that's like pretty likely. We'll give that one 20%. The other, it's 15% each or whatever. And then you can come in and it's like, cool. Now I know what the probabilities are. I can bet, just as like a simple high stakes meeting. Now at least my preparation is informed. I know where to start. I know what stuff's kind of a waste of time. I may have stimulated some thought to identify wildcard outcomes that I probably wouldn't have thought about. And we made this exercise feel very drawn out, but it can be as quick as just 10 minutes. It's like, man, I'm all over the place. What could possibly happen based with this event? Okay, this is what I want to happen. And that's obviously you want to be crystal clear on what you want to happen at any given point in time. This would be really bad. And as long as you kind of have those things mapped and you can assign probabilities there, the rest is just kind of rounding out a point of view. And this also brings a lot of leverage to conversations because you can you identified like what are the greatest opportunities and what are the greatest risks. So you're not spending time in the middle talking about shit that doesn't really matter. So it forces a sense of priority by introducing probabilities, introducing variables that can inform point of view on magnitude, etc. And so coming out of this in terms of strategic decision making, some bullets to tie this one up is mitigation strategies for the worst case scenarios, acceleration strategies for the best case scenarios, and then contingency plans for wild card events.
Yeah, I don't think so. In a lot of conversations, there's usually mitigation strategies. People talk a lot about contingency plans for wildcard events, but acceleration strategies for best case outcomes. Most times it's like, hey, you hit the best case, celebrate. It's never, okay, this is going good. How do we make it even faster? Go better,
faster. Juice it, right?
Totally.
Yeah. And then that comes back to sensitivity analysis, right? Where it's like, damn, every marginal point of improvement on this has a huge impact. So it's like, cool. Right. We thought we were going to allocate X resources to this. Let's do X plus 10.
Right. And be ready to do that, right?
And go, baby, go.
Yeah.
So a little bit of
there's like time decay. I was going to add to that. There's time decay. So maybe it's only good for now. Juice it while it's hot, right? If you miss that opportunity, it might not come back.
Yep. And I guess on the other side of the coin is this concept of diminishing returns. So it's like, we know that we hit it if we hit it hard, if we hit it way harder, it's not really going to change the return or the probability of the outcome. So let's just make sure we hit it down the middle, nice and easy. Cool. So, I mean, this just speaks to kind of the game generally, and it's more mindset. It's more, I always hate to use the word like entrepreneur, whatever, but it's like so much of this stuff is a mindset thing and a mental health thing and staying level and emotional kind of fortitude and being anti-fragile, as is often referred to. And so we're always eager to kind of add stuff like this to our toolkit so that we spend as little time as humanly possible spin cycling about stuff. And hopefully this is useful. And if anybody else has frameworks like this that help you think through big decisions, that help you avoid them, the best thing too, honestly, I guess maybe a final thought, is mapping out that worst case outcome, because we're wired to be more fearful of terrible outcomes because that's kept us alive than more excited about great outcomes. So we have a tendency to latch on to the worst outcome and just spin cycle around fear. And then we project. And it's basically like, 89% of thoughts are fear-based and 99% of those fears never come true. So it's like 89% of your thinking is a waste of your time.
Just psych yourself out.
You're just thinking about the most low probability speculative shit and you think that you're going to die. And it's like, well, actually, if the worst case thing, this deal breaks down and we get back to origination. Oh, all right. I should stop being so scared. Like I should, take my fear and, strangle it, or at least be clear on it. And then you can move forward.
And at least if we trust in our ability to find other companies like this, let's get behind it.
Yeah, totally. Or should maybe get jazzed. You're like, actually, shit.
Yeah.
And then this can kind of help you calibrate your gut. It's like, ooh, I'm really excited to originate new deals. And it's like, okay, how jazzed are you about the deal at hand? If you find yourself mentally just gravitating towards this kind of worst case outcome, it's just a super productive exercise.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll leave it at that. It's like an awareness driver. It's a mental stability thing. So we better wrap it with that. Kjael, always a pleasure, my guy. Much love, man. For the love of the game, eh?
Until next time.